Good morning, everyone. It is June 30th. Going to talk about the battlefield in Ukraine, specifically two regions. First is the Kharkiv region. Second is the Avdiivka region. Very similar situations in which Russia is conducting offensive operations, or at least attempting to conduct offensive operations. Now, these are somewhat related in how they're being executed and the successes Russia is seeing versus the successes that Ukraine is seeing. And the successes on both sides are for the same reason. It's a very interesting situation in which artillery and fires are playing a major role in why Russia is successful in Avdiivka, but also why Ukraine is now successful up near Kharkiv. So we'll go ahead and zoom in on Avdiivka first so we can kind of talk about this salient that Russia has created. And by salient, I mean this little area where it pushes out into Ukrainian territory. Now, just a few months ago, they had taken Avdiivka, and in the last 6 to 8 weeks, they have grown the territory they have taken to this space right here. Russia seized the initiative of a lack of Western equipment being provided to the Ukrainians to push further inwards, and the Ukrainians essentially had to trade territory in an attempt to attrit the Russians as they took ground. The problem is Ukraine didn't have the artillery needed to slow this to at a rate that they would have preferred. So the Russians did take more territory than expected, specifically this salient right here. Ideally, they would have cut it off and brought it down to here, but because of a lack of Western equipment and the implications of not having that artillery, the Ukrainians had to slow it down but not stop it as much as they had anticipated. Similar scenario taking place up in Kharkiv, but the roles are reversed here. Now, this is where the Ukrainians are actually surging the new equipment coming out of this most recent packages, and they're seeing successes. However, Russia, seeing their success down near Avdiivka, have somewhat prioritized the movements, and this has petered out for them. Ukraine has seized the initiative and has started taking this territory back. You can see this in these yellow regions right here. This is where Ukraine is pushing back and taking ground from the Russians, essentially doing a very good job of defending the Kharkiv region, mostly because this is where the Ukrainians have prioritized the attackums. They feel that if they can eliminate this push by Russia, it's a morale killer for the Russians, especially in the Kremlin, as this was a strategic decision by Putin himself to create this so-called buffer zone. And if the Ukrainians can eject Russia from this space, it is a political loss for Putin, because he talked about this during his recent speeches. Now, the reason Russia is struggling here is the same reason Ukraine is struggling further south. It's a lack of artillery and fires capability down here because it's been prioritized elsewhere. The Russians do not have the capability to flex on multiple fronts at once, and we are seeing that. So it's this chess match almost. As we zoom out, you can see there's this chess match between the Ukrainians and the Russians with trying to prioritize limited amounts of equipment. And so as Russia pushed here, we saw other parts of the battlefield somewhat slow down, specifically running through the south here. Then they saw some successes as Ukraine had to back off due to a lack of equipment. So Russia surged here, but that meant this lost steam, and now Ukraine is pushing here. So it's almost like these feelers are being put out across the entirety of the battlefield as this new Western equipment comes online, which the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense said wouldn't be fully up and running until at least mid to late July. We're going to see this take place on the battlefield here, this kind of cat and mouse between Russia and Ukraine to see if they can conduct offensives to counteroffensives back and forth. It's fully expected that as the Western equipment moves into Ukraine, as the F-16s come online, as more missiles, as Patriot defense systems come online, the slow ejection of Russia will take place. We will see a stop across the battlefield. I'm not saying it's going to be rapid. We're still talking about many, many months to probably years of fighting if this continues. But we're going to see essentially what it's going to look like: a few months of a full stalemate, and then slowly Ukraine will start to gain the initiative. But again, it's predicated on continued support from the West. And it looks like the G7 at least and NATO are still fully committed to helping out Ukraine and giving them more weight behind their capability to strike into Russia and hit targets in Russia, which makes it very difficult for Russia to focus on the front lines when they're having to defend so heavily in their rear echelons.